Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to CLSA's monthly webinar series. My name is Jeff Burgess. I am your Executive Director. And we'll just go through a bit of housekeeping before we get to our presentation. First off, I want to review the CLSA event calendar with everyone. Next week, on Tuesday, November 15th, beginning at 8 in the morning, we'll have Jeff Lucas presenting two half-day workshops, seminars. So it's a full-day workshop with two topics. That session will be in Southern California at the Wyndham Anaheim Garden Grove, again, Tuesday, November 15th. Wednesday, November 16th, another webinar, the Network RTK Systems in California. That's Wednesday, November 16th at 11 a.m. Thursday, November 17th, we have our Northern California session of the Jeff Lucas workshops at the 4 Points in Pleasanton. Wednesday, December 14th at 11 a.m. we have the Wednesday, December 14th at 11 a.m. we have another CLSA webinar, Phasing Boundary Surveys. Wednesday, January 4th, 2017 at 11 a.m. we have Rick Moore returning to present important changes in the PLS application process. And then March 24th through the 28th, 2017, the CLSA Annual Conference will be conducted at the Wyndham Anaheim Garden Grove. To view all these events and to register, please visit our website, californiasurveyors.org, and click on the event calendar. So about today's webinar and how you can interact and be a part of it. Within your GoToWebinar dashboard, you'll note a question box. Within that question box, simply write your question in, and I, as the moderator, will look for opportunities to convey that question to Rick during his presentation. I'll also relay those questions during Q&A, so if you don't have an audio option or are shy about asking Rick your question, you can enter it into the question box. Once we get to Q&A, we encourage you to raise your virtual hand. Again, that is in your dashboard. Raise your hand and we will unmute you, and you can pose a question directly to Rick through the webinar. You can also download this presentation as a handout. The handouts are noted in your GoToWebinar dashboard. Well, we're pleased to have Rick Moore rejoining us for the CLSA webinar series. Rick is the Executive Officer of BPLSG. He began his surveying career over 34 years ago, working in the private sector in Colorado, Arizona, and New England before moving to California in 1990. While working in the Ventura, Santa Barbara areas, he began to assist with state land surveyor exam grading and development. In 2007, Rick became the land surveyor consultant to what was then BPELS. When the senior registrar land surveyor position was created, he applied and was hired to that position. After managing the internal licensing examination operations of the board, Rick was appointed by the board to be the BPLSG Executive Officer in July of 2011. So with that, thanks again, Rick, and please take it away.
Good morning, everyone. What we're going to be talking about today is related is both related to recent events and something that's ongoing for our board, ongoing effort in terms of unlicensed practice, and more specifically, the unlicensed practice that tends to run into situations where a seal or a licensee's signature is compromised. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the collaboration with this situation. It's a very collaborative effort, and one that is very important to the success of the results of the investigation here. Of course, as a board, we have our role of investigating any licensed or unlicensed practice, but this is a situation where the board expands its team, generally by involving the Department of Consumer Affairs has an organization called the Division of Investigation. And many times with unlicensed practice, we deal with the local sheriff, the local police, law enforcement, district attorney. That's very required, very much required in these situations. But more importantly, these are the collaborative efforts where the licensee and the public really help out in these situations. The most recent one that has driven us to even have this webinar, even though it's a bad situation, because all unlicensed practice or identity theft or licensee theft is a bad situation, the good that came out of this is the efforts from the licensee base and the public's base talking with us at the board and allowing us to provide both the Division of Investigation and the local law enforcement with much more information and much more integrity to our concerns. So there is a win out of this situation that we have to pay attention to all the time. You know, typically at the board, we track unlicensed enforcement. Over the last 3 years, you can see the numbers on the slide, is pretty much for just land surveying related investigations, 24% of our annual investigations involve unlicensed practice of land surveying. And it's about that same amount for engineering too, most of it being civil. Usually when there is unlicensed practice that we are investigating, it typically involves an individual or multiple individuals that have some knowledge or tie to the industry. Maybe they're a former tie, they used to work in the industry, they're not quite licensed, or they have a relative that was in the industry. We find that to be more often the case. They also, we tend to see that when a licensee is involved in these situations where we're considering whether a licensee is aiding and abetting unlicensed practice, the licensee generally does not fully understand the role of professional or responsible charge, and they pretty much don't understand or ever read the laws that regulate the offering and performing of land surveying services in California. The role of Division of Investigations in the investigative process. This is a very important role for all the boards underneath the Department of Consumer Affairs. There are some boards that are large enough to have their own investigative personnel, but most of us do not. We would utilize DOI for this process. And DOI, basically what they do is they provide a law enforcement arm to the investigative services, the DCA. You've probably heard us at the board say several times that we are not an enforcement agency. That's what DOI provides to the DCA boards, is that law enforcement arm. They generally are sworn peace officers. They're generally experienced in the law enforcement sector before coming to DOI. They assist the boards with locating and interviewing witnesses, which is very important when it comes to unlicensed activities, because many times those people don't want us contacting them or interviewing them or even knowing they exist. They also help us gather evidence. They report facts. They gather information there. And they do have the authority to issue misdemeanor citations on the spot if they believe it's warranted. In addition, I believe they can even make arrests if they believe it's warranted. And they really help the boards submit criminal complaints to the local agencies, primarily the DA's office, They help assist the local sheriff and local police enforcement. That's where they really come through on that, and that's where we need their efforts. The role of the local law enforcement and DA. When there's unlicensed practice, the board has only so much control over the activities by an unlicensed person. So when there's situations where there may be criminal activity involved or trends of activity that's been going on for a long time where the local public or consumers are being harmed, we really need to have local law enforcement and the district attorney involved because they have much more authority over those processes. So typically when we're dealing with them, we have to convince them to file criminal violations. They collaborate with us and DOI in investigations, and they work directly with DOI with investigative efforts. So that's something that really helps out a lot, especially with this more recent activity that we've been seeing. This is typically what the board sees when we see unlicensed practice, especially when it comes to the use of the seal or signatures. So when we see fraudulent use of seal, it's a lot of times it's normally a good person who's working somewhere, and due to some kind of pressure or just not thinking, they make a bad decision. We come across those quite often. We also see that it's usually the result of poor management procedures in terms of how deliverables are leaving the office and how they're being sealed and signed and who's keeping track of that seal and quality control procedures. We also see that licensees do not or rarely fully educate their staff members or their coworkers on the importance and risk involved if the seal should ever be compromised. You have situations where if that happens, it can be detrimental to the revenue of the company. It can be detrimental to the insurance. It can really hurt everyone in the company, not just the licensee. And we also notice in almost all these cases, whether they're unlicensed people or even the licensees, they fail to really understand the laws that regulate the use of the seal and the signature. So let's talk about licensed exposure because that's really what's important here with this one. When you have a seal, when you're licensed, you're able to obtain a seal. You can call up any company, you can be marketed by any company that manufactures those seals, and you can buy a seal. And they very rarely, if any, require any kind of identification to show that you really are legitimately licensed to use that seal. And that's important. That's something that this board doesn't regulate. All we do is regulate that the seal is required. And that's something to keep in mind when you're ordering those. They're very easy to electronically duplicate. So you have the situation where seals were issued for many years on hard copy documents. They can be scanned, electronically duplicated. Now they're electronically applied more often than not, and those can be duplicated. There's many ways where that can happen, and that exposes the licensee to the use of their seal. When documents that are sealed and signed are submitted to agencies, to clients, to wherever you're delivering your documents, how often does a licensee, or how often do people require, well, I want to see the ID of the licensee, that's on these documents. They rarely ever think about verifying the person who's delivering the documents and whether the licensee really applied that seal and signature. People tend to leave their seal laying around in an office, on their desk, in a drawer, at their house. There's all kinds of ways that seals are left around. Even need to think about when your seal goes bad, you need to order another one, just the way that you throw it away and dispose of it. Others, if they want to, can have access to that seal. and we notice that's a high level of exposure that we need to pay attention to. Another way is the failure to properly comply with the laws for the use of the seal and signature. And I have a little picture on that slide because this is what I used to do when I was in private practice. When I submitted documents or provided documents to whoever, and they were not final documents, I'm required by the Business Professions Code, the Land Surveyors Act, to make sure my name and my license number at a minimum is on that document, and that I indicate very clearly the document is a draft or preliminary in nature. What I always did in those situations is I typically had my seal in AutoCAD on those documents ready to go should they become final. I would superimpose a draft or preliminary stamp in red right over my seal. To me, that showed that it was me that applied it, and that it would be more difficult for someone to electronically capture or duplicate that seal. I was very wary of that. Unfortunately, when you're doing final documents, you can't always do something like that. You need to make sure the seal is clear and legible for others that need to rely upon that or use that or properly manage and store that or archive it. Land surveyors tend to have additional risk of license exposure over and above, say, engineers or geologists. And that's due to land surveyors having a requirement to apply their number to monuments in the form of tags or plastic caps or aluminum caps or brass discs. And that requires that land surveyor to order those tags or those caps. That requires that land surveyor to have those tags and caps distributed to their field crews so that they can efficiently apply those when they're studying monuments, and many times it's multiple field crews. So that's a real critical exposure to a land surveyor. And a land surveyor's documents, more than many of the other licensees' documents, tend to be a public document naturally, so that your seal and your signature is out there for everyone to use and see. So these are the things that these are some of the examples that show that licensed land surveyors do encumber additional risk with their license. At the board, we do have a few suggestions on what you can do to protect your license, to protect, to kind of at least monitor and be aware of possible uses of your license. Definitely become familiar with the regulations that mandate the use of that. That's for the CLSA Act of Land Surveyors is 8761. And that was originally implemented not just to protect the public, but to protect the licensee also. And when those changes came into effect, especially with the preliminary and draft, that was to help aid in submitting the documents through a process in the middle of a project or at the end of a project, but also to help indicate that these plans or these maps, whichever the case, were properly supervised or overseen by an authorized individual. We also suggest that each licensee establish some kind of way to maintain adequate oversight of their physical seal and their electronic seal. There should be some kind of procedure in place for you to be very comfortable, or as comfortable as you can be, with that oversight. I know some licensees have kept a copy of every single document they've ever signed and sealed. I know others keep their physical seals locked up in drawers and their electronic seals under password protection. But of course, it's like anything else. There are ways to get around these things. It's just that every single additional hurdle that you put into place and implement will help deter people from trying to utilize these in a way that's not been authorized. Another way that is very important that you can implement as part of that oversight is to regularly educate staff or coworkers on the proper use and control of the seal signature. In an earlier slide, I talked about a good person making a bad decision. Sometimes that was conscious behavior, sometimes that was not conscious behavior in our experiences. Sometimes non-technical staff or non-licensed staff don't fully understand that it's not okay to just bring the seal in into this AutoCAD drawing and print it out and give it to a client because they're here and you're on vacation. Or that they have copies of your signature. A lot of times they just do not understand the repercussions of that information going out like that. And so we highly recommend that you regularly sit down with your coworkers, your staff, and go over the proper use and control of your physical, your electronic seal, physical seal, and your signature. Here's some additional suggestions that we have thought about here at the board that, primarily due to recent situations, maybe the professional society, let me start here a different way, is there are surveyor supply stores where land surveyors typically order their caps and their tags, and they're both within the state and they're outside the state. But one of the ways that CLSA as a professional society can really help with this situation globally is to put together some kind of an educational program similar to what they did with monument preservation and the right of entry. Those were successful programs. And they can put something together like that that all the members of CLSA can go to the supply stores in California or where they normally locate or order these tags and caps and ask them to consider requiring some kind of way of verifying that it's actually the licensee or authorized representatives of that licensee when they order these tags and caps, and more importantly, when they receive them. It's something that maybe CLSA would like to consider. And there's also another way that we suggest that each land surveyor find some way to implement an inventory control plan for monitoring the tags and caps that they have in their hands, in their possession. Know when they're being set, know how many are left, know who has access to them. It's something that I know I didn't always think about when I was in private practice, and several of you probably have, maybe haven't, but it's something that I think once implemented, it will become second nature, and then again, it adds another hurdle to help protect your license and the integrity of the work that you do. Last few comments here on this situation, or at least on this topic. When you run into a situation where you believe that your license has been compromised, or possibly has been compromised, there's some things that you probably should not do, and there's some things you probably should do. And we totally understand the anger and frustration involved if something like this ever happens. I know I would be very upset. I know that I would want to lash out and see what I could do to take care of it myself and not wait on people. But you got to pull back a little bit and think about what could hurt you even more, and what could you do to help the situation so it doesn't affect you any further, possibly affecting the public that was harmed or possibly harmed, or could help make sure other licensees were not harmed. Whatever you do, don't try to perform your own sting operation. I completely understand why anyone would like to do that, but that could be dangerous, and that could bring up a whole slew of issues and things you do not want to have to deal with. What you really do want to do is, if in a situation like this comes to your attention, try to communicate with the people that brought it to your attention or the people involved. Try to gather the information you can, as much as you can, and then immediately report it to local law enforcement. Immediately report it to BPELS. When after we notified all the licensee base of this situation a couple months back, we've received many, many more inquiries. Some had nothing to do with the situation. Others did have some kind of involvement with it, and that helped us at the board where we could provide that additional information to the Division of Investigation, to the local law enforcement authorities, to the local DA. And all of that brings a lot more credence and integrity to our concerns. They start taking us a lot more seriously that this is a major concern and people are being harmed, whether those people are the public or whether they're licensees. And that's our first concern, is to protect everyone in these situations. Professional Practices Committee. I know that several people are thinking, well, let's contact the PPC, let's see what they can do to help us. I'm sure that they would love to help, and I'm sure that they have good intentions in doing things like that. But whereas PPCs work very, very well in making sure that compliance with our laws and regulations are more widespread, such as making sure that maps, records of surveys, quarter records are filed appropriately. That process works great with the PPC. This is not a situation where the PPC should be investigating. There's major reasons why, and they also tie into the individual desire to do your own sting and do your own investigation. The things that we've experienced the most in those situations here at the board is when PPCs or individuals decide to go out there, in their own mode and try to do something, many, many times that has jeopardized our official investigations. And that can cause more harm than good with a lot of this. At the very least, it can alert the unlicensed people that there are officials aware of it, and then they go into hiding or they change their tactics. At the very best in the situation, or actually that was the best, the very worst in the situations is that it could be dangerous. You could harm yourself. You could find yourself under some kind of allegations of criminal or civil liability. You could harm someone else accidentally. You don't want to run into a situation like that. You need to report the situation to proper authorities. So this is the information that we wanted to put out to the board, to the licensee base. We wanted to try to get as much information out as we are allowed to do. I will say that the most recent activity that has triggered these concerns at the board, I will say there's some bad news and some good news about that. I will say the bad news, as far as you all are probably concerned, is I really can't say much about it. There's not a lot I can reveal. That's also the good news. The good news is due to this, the awareness of this going out there, due to the collaboration of licensees, both contacting our board directly or running into situations and talking to the consumers who contact our board then directly, it has made this situation a little bit more successful, and we've got the attention of the officials at DOI, we got the attention of the local DAs and law enforcement. So this is turning into a better situation. We just hope the end result will turn out well for all of us. And we don't want to jeopardize the investigation or any other investigation as we move forward with that. So I will say that it's something that it's a good thing. We all need to, be watchful of and protect. So I put up some contact information up here. This is specifically contact information right to enforcement. That phone number is a line that is usually answered, and I say usually because enforcement staff, there's a person assigned to answer that phone or those messages every day. They rotate through enforcement staff in doing that. That is a specific email address that we set up just to allow people to contact us about information, and people are monitoring that email address on a daily basis. And then the website, social media, mailing address, of course, that information is always there. But those first two go directly to enforcement. So at this point, I'm going to ask if there's any questions or any concerns, anything anyone wants to talk about.
Okay, folks, now's your time to pose a question if you have one to Rick. Please raise your virtual hand in your GoToWebinar dashboard, or enter your question in the question box, and I'll convey your question for you. I have a question here, Rick. Are you aware of any maps having been filed using an unknowing licensee's number and signature?
In the past, yes. With prior situations a few years back, yes, we ran into a couple situations like that. And fortunately, those came out that we were able to work with local law enforcement to secure the individual that was responsible for that in more than one case. More recently, I am not personally aware of anything right now.
Okay. Don't have any other questions at this time, but we'll leave it open. One just popped in here. Is this current investigation in Southern California, and will the name be released?
That's very good information, or very good questions. It is generally, I know a lot of the concerns that have been expressed to us at the board have been generated from the Southern California region. And eventually there will be information that will be subject to public release, but I really can't fully answer that now because it really depends on the results of the investigation and where it goes. I know there are situations, generally speaking, there are situations where licensees are involved in unlicensed behavior, and they've been subject to disciplinary action. So those are public documents that can be viewed on our website associated with those licensees or former licensees.
All right. Scanning the audience right now to see if there are any other questions. Folks, now's your time to ask Rick if you've got a question about this issue, or perhaps even another one. We don't want to blindside him necessarily, but well, Rick, that's it on my end in terms of questions from the audience, and I don't see any attendee hands raised. So with that, thank you for powering through today's presentation with a cold. We appreciate that. We will be making the webinar available, the webinar recording available via a YouTube link on the CLSA members only section of the CLSA website. And I'll send that link directly out to all the registrants in today's webinar. One additional question here, Rick. Can the board mandate? Can the board mandate? That's it.
Can the board mandate what?
Yeah, that's all I got.
Oh, hopefully they finish that.
Can the board mandate ID for blank?
For like ordering the tags and caps, maybe?
For stamps.
Yeah, probably not. That's probably something we don't have control over how those survey supply stores, how they operate and what they can or cannot do. That's why I really encouraged that suggestion, because from our point of view here at the board, some of the actions that CLSA has taken in the last 4 or 5 years with their efforts of monument preservation, their efforts, the right of entry, and going around and talking to all the local law enforcement and in each chapter of people doing that, those are very successful as far as we're concerned. And we refer to those quite often when we talk to other organizations. And we think that if CLSA tries to do something like that, while it's not mandating or requiring it, it at least brings awareness to the surveyor supply stores, because many of them have developed relationship with land surveyors and engineers over the years. And they depend on you for survival as much as you depend on them to provide you with the services and supplies. So I think that it's a very good situation if you can bring this awareness to them. And I just don't believe the board really has that kind of control.
Okay, a couple more questions coming in. This is great. With the advent of computers and digital sign and submittals, should we be rethinking the stamp? Should it be required for people to check with the LS on deliverable?
That's a very good question. I don't think there's any suggestion in today's world that should not be considered and see where it goes. We're talking about that ourselves here at the board as we're considering changes to our application process and going more to an online type of application process. And what do we do with references that need to sign and seal? We're trying to get away from paper and be a little more electronic so that things can be done more efficiently. But then you also have to have that protection aspect and everything. So I think that's an excellent question. I think it's something that the professional organizations, all of them, not just CLSA, and the board could collaborate on and see what we could do to come up with something. And I think we ought to keep thinking along those lines of what we can do to help them.
All right, yeah. We'll definitely look forward to engaging in that potential process. Another question did pop in. Can PLS, I think this is a similar question to one that was already posed, can surveyors have professional identity cards created by the board? Well, I think you may have addressed that a bit already.
You mean in addition? Well, we did issue those white plastic cards recently, and that is one of the reasons why we did that. Is those are not being made for everybody. Those are only being made for active licensees. Anyone that has a license that is delinquent, they have not paid their fees, or allowed it to go delinquent, or retired, or not necessarily retired, but just not keeping it up to date, they did not receive that card automatically. So the idea behind that is as an additional notification to anyone in the public that this person is identified as someone who is proven to be a licensed person, able to do the work, authorized to do the work they say they can do. I don't know what else we can do beyond that at this point, but we're open to any kind of thoughts or ideas that anyone wants to share with us.
Okay, great. I think CLSA should have a letter, contact, email campaign with the stamp tag companies at least in this state, and ask that they require license verification prior to taking orders. Perhaps a SurveyMonkey to find out who the members use. Verification might be a good jumping off point from here, Rick, for us to collaborate on that sort of campaign.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, folks, for the questions there. I don't see any additional questions, nor do I see any hands raised. So with that, again, thank you, Rick, for providing this important information about some nefarious activity going on these days in the California surveying community. We look forward to working with you and supporting you in addressing it. And folks, like I said, please check out californiasurveyors.org for future event registrations. Rick, thanks again, and we'll look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and whatever I can do to help you guys, let me know.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Rick. Thank you all for joining us today.